In competitive Pokemon, there are thousands of variables that can go into every single game. But these different variables all have different levels of importance. It can range anywhere from what moves you use on your Amoonguss to an ability that enables the entire strategy of your team. But one of the most important aspects of a Pokemon team in today's day and age has only been around for 2 or 3 generations. Terrain was added in Generation 6, but most people don't really know that. This is because they didn't add a Pokemon with the ability to set it up without using a move until Generation 7. In Pokemon X and Y, the Grassy, Electric, and Misty Terrain moves were added into Pokemon's move pools. But it wasn't until Pokemon Sun and Moon with the addition of Psychic Terrain that these terrains were given the ability to set up on Switch-In. These of course were accompanied by the 4 Island Legendaries in Sun and Moon, Tapu Koko with the Electric Surge ability, Tapu Bulu with the Grassy Surge, Tapu Fini with the Misty Surge ability, and Tapu Lele with the brand new Psychic Surge ability. Now since then we have gotten 1 additional Pokemon that can set up these terrains on Switch-In, and we even got 2 for the Electric Terrain, one of which being a Box Art Legendary. But today we're going to talk about the effectiveness of the terrains themselves and not necessarily which Pokemon use them. Now of course there will be offensive benefits to some of these terrains, which is very important and that will not be overlooked. But Electric Terrain will not receive a major benefit just because Miraidon has the ability Hadron Engine. And currently in Scarlet and Violet we do not have access to the Tapu Pokemon, so the Pokemon that uses the ability is going to have more importance. Because building an entire team around a Pincurchin doesn't seem like a great idea in theory or in practice. But of course there are certain moves, abilities, and items that require these terrains, so everything will be looked at from a top-down view. So with the terrain war that's currently going on in VGC, with every team seemingly having a Miraidon, Rillaboom, or Indeedee, it was absolutely shocking to see only 3 of the top 8 teams in the Portland Regional have a terrain setter. But if you expand a little bit and look past the top 8, looking more at the entire Day 2 roster, it is much more prominent in seeing these terrain setters. This is because much like weather, having your own terrain up can significantly boost your Pokemon's strength and nerf your opponent's strategy. But overall, which one of these terrains is better? But before we get into it, if you're liking the video so far, please consider subscribing. It does help me out a ton and lets me keep bringing content to you as consistently as I can. And hey, leaving a like lets YouTube and me know that you want to keep seeing more of this. So it's a win-win for everybody. Anyways, back to the terrains. So before we can decide which terrain is actually the best, we need to talk about what each terrain does. So Misty Terrain that is set up by Galarian Weezing actually weakens dragon moves by 50% and stops all status conditions from occurring. So this means if you have a Calyrex Ice on the field and you don't want it to get burned, if you have Misty Terrain up, it can't. Now something to note for all of these terrains is that it only affects Pokemon that are grounded, meaning they're not floating. This means basically any Pokemon that is not a flying type has the ability to levitate, anything like that. Of course, being immune to status conditions does seem very strong, but it does not provide any offensive boost. I mean, I guess it boosts Misty Explosion, but, you know, that kind of KOs your own Pokemon, and it's really just a Fairy-type Earthquake if someone switches in and gets rid of the terrain. Anyways, up next is the Electric Terrain, which does give a 1.3 times boost to Electric-type moves and stops you from falling asleep. This is clearly just a more offensive version of the Misty Terrain we just talked about. This is because it does trade off the ability to stop burns, paralysis, and poison, but it does give that 30% boost to strong Electric-type attackers. If they're on the ground, of course. RIP Zapdos. Next we have the Psychic Terrain, which increases the power of Psychic-type moves by 1.3 times and blocks both sides from using priority moves on each other. This means if you have a Pokemon with the Prankster ability, you can still set up a Prankster Tailwind on your own side, but you can't use Prankster Taunt on the opponent. And with how common priority moves are in VGC, this effect seems very strong. And the final terrain is the Grassy Terrain, which boosts Grass-type moves by 1.3%, heals every Pokemon on the ground for 1/16 of their max HP every single turn, and weakens the effects of Earthquake, Bulldoze, and Magnitude by 50%. This is easily the longest list of effects that a terrain is going to have. Unless in Generation 10 we somehow get a new terrain that has 13 effects and somehow makes Calyrex Ice Rider and Calyrex Shadow Rider even more overpowered. God, I hate those horses. Anyways, jumping into the number 4 spot, we have the Misty Terrain. I feel like this terrain is severely underused right now, as Galarian Weezing is the setter for it, and it comes with the Neutralizing Gas ability. So having an outclassed ability slot means that really the only way to set this up is by using the move itself. And in VGC, using these status moves that don't actually impede the other player or help your own team in a setup move aren't really worth the move slot. And in a Pokemon like Grimmsnarl, who has the access to the Prankster ability, which makes all status moves go first, and access to the Misty Terrain move, which would always go first with Prankster, You would have to give up either one of your screens, Parting Shot, Thunder Wave, or a damaging move. This is because there are so many other tools that the Pokemon that get Misty Terrain could be clicking that using the move actually takes up a turn for no reason. Like if you have a Flutter Mane or an Iron Valiant, you would much rather spend your time clicking something useful rather than setting up a terrain that could just get erased next turn. It may be worth the move slot if Misty Terrain actually boosted the power of Fairy-type moves by 30%. This is because it could give an effect similar to Fairy Aura where it can change breakpoints for Fairy types. Like if a Pokemon is EV trained to live a Terra Fairy Dazzling Gleam from a Calyrex Shadow Rider, but Misty Terrain is set up, it would now one-hit KO. However, this is not the case, and there are no Pokemon that can offensively take advantage of this terrain, except for any Pokemon with Misty Explosion who would prefer not to run it. Of course, a 50% damage reduction from Dragon-type moves is very nice, but with the addition of the Fairy typing itself, players have become much more cautious in clicking moves like Draco Meteor. Even strong Dragon-type Pokemon like Koraidon prefer to leave the Dragon-type moves at home. If you have a Miraidon on the field and the opponent has a Rillaboom who directly counters you, most of the time you can't just safely click Draco Meteor to get rid of it, as it could switch into a Fairy type at any moment. And with this direct counter, the benefit of having a 50% damage decrease really isn't that big. Additionally, the Misty Seed triggers on this terrain, which gives you a +1 to your special defense stat. Which, you know, is nice. It can help you resist like Astral Barrage or Electro Drift or anything else that one-hit KOs most Pokemon. Now, coming in at our number 3 spot is going to be the Electric Terrain. This of course stops Pokemon from falling asleep, quite like the last one, but it also gives a 30% boost to Electric-type moves. Now, this terrain sees a lot of play, as Miraidon has been oppressive early in Regulation I, but it failed to top 8 at the last tournament, so maybe its usage is going to go down just a little bit. Electric Terrain does have one benefit that no other terrain has, though. That is activating the Quark Drive ability of all future Paradox Pokemon, which boosts one stat by one stage as long as it is on the field. This is why Iron Hands is so often seen with Miraidon, as it gets a +1 boost to its attack whenever the Electric Terrain is set up. This allows Pokemon with the Quark Drive ability to use other items other than the booster energy and still get the +1 boost to their preferred stat. However, this is only half of the Paradox Pokemon that were added in Generation 9, and even then, it is only a small handful of the 1,000+ Pokemon we've had so far in the games. Improving all of these crazy strong Pokemon by one stat each is actually an incredible advantage to Electric Terrain, but it's just not as good as the next two. Especially since these effects apply to both sides of the field, we need to be able to team build around our terrains. But with how common these Paradox Pokemon are, you could easily be helping the opposing team. A Pokemon holding the Electric Seed gets a +1 to its defense when Electric Terrain is set up, which can be very helpful considering two of the most oppressive and populated Pokemon of all time in Urshifu and Incineroar both hit on the physical side. Additionally, the move Rising Voltage is 70 base power and doubles to 140 base power when it is used on Electric Terrain. This is overall just a worse version of Expanding Force, which we will get to later, as it only hits one Pokemon whether it is on Electric Terrain or not. This move also does not receive the 30% increase in Electric-type power, meaning that it wouldn't gain an additional 30% because of the Electric Terrain, as it already doubles because of the Electric Terrain. Overall, it is much more offensive of a field effect, only limiting one thing defensively, but enabling so many offensive Pokemon. So I think it slots in very nicely at the number 3 spot. Now coming in at number 2, we have the Grassy Terrain. This of course provides every single Pokemon on the field with a form of leftovers recovery. Which, again, we need to remember that terrain affects both sides. However, if you build a team with Grassy Terrain, you can expect that your team will have a bulkier setup than the opposing team. Because although you are giving a benefit to the opponent, you can also give yourself a much larger benefit by EVing your Pokemon correctly in order to gain more from the Grassy Terrain benefit. This terrain also stops 50% of the damage from spread ground type moves that hit every Pokemon on the field. This means that Earthquake will lose 50% of its power, but a move like Precipice Blades that only hits the opponents will not. So although this is a great answer for Earthquake spamming teams with things like Wide Guard, Telepathy, and Levitate, this effect doesn't help much outside of those situations. It gives a 1.3 times bonus to Grass type moves, which are very high base power in general in VGC, meaning moves like Wood Hammer and Power Whip get a 30% boost, but it also gives Rillaboom's Grassy Glide an increased stage of priority. Now this move is only 55 base power, used to be 70, can't believe they allowed that. With the Grassy Terrain boost, it is at least comparable to the damage of something like a Sucker Punch. Now Rillaboom being the setter of the Grassy Terrain getting this benefit is incredible for its kit. Considering it already has a big attack stat, getting its grass moves increased by 1.3 times as well as the stab multiplier is huge for it. Add on top of that it is an avid assault vest user, so having that extra recovery is incredible. But overall, letting your big bulky attackers have access to the leftovers item without using their item slot is really what lets Grassy Terrain shine through. And with Scarlet and Violet, Grassy Glide can now be learned by almost 40 Pokemon, so giving an additional Grass-type priority move to so many Pokemon can be incredibly powerful. Especially with the prominence of a Focus Sash in VGC, even letting one Pokemon get a last hurrah when it's on 6 HP to break the opponent's Sash can be critical. So I would argue it actually gives more of an offensive boost than the Electric Terrain, while still giving a great defensive upside in passive recovery. Additionally, holding the Grassy Seed does boost your defense similar to the Electric Seed, which of course is nice for the same Pokemon. So I think with all these reasons, Grassy Terrain easily slides in at number 2 and is only second to the Psychic Terrain. The Psychic Terrain blocks all priority, which is absolutely crucial for VGC. If you're wondering why it blocks priority moves, it heightens your Pokemon senses so they can foresee the priority moves coming. It's really cool. But anyways, this thing stops Fake Out, which is arguably the best move in VGC history. If you're not sure why, Fake Out stops the opponent from moving if it lands. It is almost guaranteed at +3 priority, meaning it can stop Prankster priority moves, and it's a physical normal type attack that does 40 damage. And I know it might seem crazy that a 40 base power move can be the best move in competitive Pokemon, and forcing the hand by making your opponent unable to move or forcing them to protect can be incredibly valuable. And additionally to Fake Out, Psychic Terrain also prevents Sucker Punch, which is very threatening to the Psychic types that prefer to use this terrain. Namely the Psychic types that like to carry the move Expanding Force. This move is 80 base power but goes up to 104 and hits both opposing Pokemon when the Psychic Terrain is active. This can turn almost any good special attacker into a sweeper on this terrain. Additionally, Psychic Terrain stops a complete archetype of Pokemon, which are the Prankster Disruptors. So this means that half of the Pokemon that tried to apply status against the Misty Terrain but it was blocked also cannot apply status on the Psychic Terrain as it is applied with priority. So that Grimmsnarl trying to apply a Prankster Thunder Wave will not work, and neither will that Whimsicott trying to get a Prankster Encore off onto your Protect. Additionally, it's not like the setter of this terrain in Indeedee is anything to laugh at. It has access to the friendly side priority moves of Helping Hand and Follow Me, which are of course allowed in Psychic Terrain. But with Prankster Pokemon being unable to disrupt these support style Pokemon by using something like Taunt or Encore, they can sit there and use these moves like Follow Me and Helping Hand as many times as they need to. And a Pokemon with the Psychic Seed does get a special defense boost. Overall, I think Psychic Terrain was great for VGC as it stops people from just clicking Fake Out, switching out, clicking Fake Out, switching out. But with that move being a staple for years, you can't see it going away anytime soon. And even with Psychic Terrain being so powerful, we still see so many teams with Electric and Grassy Terrain respectively. This is because Pokemon is a meta-based game. Just because Psychic Terrain is the best on paper does not mean that it is going to win every tournament or top 8 or even top 32. And with the prominence of Pokemon like Miraidon and Rillaboom, Indeedee has a lot of competition. So overall, I have Psychic Terrain in first place, Grassy Terrain in second place, Electric Terrain in third place, and Misty Terrain in fourth place. I do personally love Misty Terrain, and I do think it's very strong on these physical attacking restricteds to prevent them from getting burned. But being the only terrain that does not provide an offensive boost does truly give you such a disadvantage. Overall, I do think with the inevitable return of the Island Quartet, we will see a lot more use of Misty Surge, but for now, it will remain the bottom. Overall, what's your favorite terrain to use in competitive? Let me know in the comments. And what changes do you think could be made to maybe shake up the order of which terrain is best? Could tweaking a move like Misty Explosion make Misty Surge more viable? Let me know. And as always, have a great day.